But thank you all so much for joining us for Armchair Travel to Seville, Spain with the Traveling Librarian. Join Jeff Klapes, the Traveling Librarian, for an armchair traveler's journey to Seville, Spain. Jeff is the retired head of reference services at the Lucius Beebe Memorial Library in Wakefield, Massachusetts, and he is an avid traveler and photographer. I again want to thank the Friends of the Library for sponsoring. So all 120 plus of us who are watching live and the many more that will watch the recording, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Jeff for joining us this afternoon. And Jeff, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Robert. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. For those of you who are in New England, it's freezing, so I'm happy to be taking you to a place where it's actually warm and sunny. So hopefully that will make you feel a little bit better today. I will try, as Robert mentioned, as we go through the program, if you have any questions, feel free to put them preferably in the Q&A or the chat. I'll check them both. And if there's any that I can answer as we go through the program, I will. And if not, at the end, I'll try and catch up with everything at the very end. So I'm going to get started right away. And whoops, here we go. I actually was there very recently. This is a trip I took only a month ago at the very beginning of November, which is a lovely time to be in Spain because the weather is pleasant. It's not too hot. And it's also nowhere near as touristy as it is in the summer. So you can kind of see on the map way down south in Andalusia, you can see Seville, which is the capital of that region of Spain. And I spent 8 days there, 6 of them in Seville proper. And then I took a day trip on the train to Córdoba, which I will show you, and also a separate trip to Ronda, which is in the mountains just a couple hours, hour and a half south of the city. So we'll look at that as well. To put Seville on the map, I should mention that it's about the size of Boston, roughly. It's the 5th largest city in Spain. And in the metro area around it, it's got about 1.5 million people. It's on the Guadalquivir River, which you can see flowing through the left-hand side of this Google map view. And it's a very old city. It goes back to the 8th century BC, although most of what you see now in the historic center, which is pretty much this area here, is mostly from the medieval time period. A brief thumbnail history, just to again put it in perspective, it was taken in the early 700s by the Moors. This was an Islamic conquest. Until Ferdinand II, who is now considered a very holy saint in the city, he reconquered it for the Christians back in 1248. And we're going to talk a little bit about how that influenced the architecture and the history of the city at that time. A couple other major events that occurred in the medieval time period were the Jewish massacres, the anti-Jewish massacres, I should say, which started at the end of the 14th century and lasted for a good 100 years until the Jews were finally completely expelled in 1492 by Isabella and Ferdinand, who were the royals at that time. Today, it is one of Spain's most visited cities. It's the 3rd in the country after Madrid and Barcelona. On the right, you can see my lovely hotel with the view out the back window. I had a very tiny room, but it was very comfortable, and with a sumptuous buffet breakfast and a private bathroom. I think it was about 100 euros a night, so actually pretty inexpensive. It's a good time of year to travel to Spain for that reason. And those of you who come to my programs in the past know that I'm an architecture nerd because that was my my studies in undergraduate years. So I'm always looking at architecture, and Seville is probably one of the most amazing cities I've ever visited. For that, it's one of the best aspects of the city, and it's a very walkable city, partly because most of the things that a visitor would want to see are in a pretty reasonable area in the center of the medieval city, and also because it's flat. So it's relatively easy to walk from one end of the city to the other. Bring your walking shoes and just explore. I'm just going to show you a few random examples of some of the beautiful buildings around the city. One thing you'll see a lot of is these unusual squared off bay windows, which are very common in the city. Here's a different version of the same thing. And you'll also find, of course, that many of the buildings, including even very recent ones, have a distinct Moorish or Arabic flair to them because of the influence of the Moorish culture in medieval times, and it still is part of the city today. One thing that you can do if you don't feel like walking is it's very popular to take horse-drawn carriage tours around the historic center, and because of all the cobblestones and the horses, it's a very atmospheric sound to hear the clip clop of the horses. We're going to visit the cathedral, which is probably the single most important site in the city. We'll visit that shortly. But again, just a variety of examples of what you see if you stroll around the very narrow lanes throughout the city. This is a good example of something I saw very frequently, which is this is a church that was a Christian church with, as you can see, extremely Islamic design influences, part of it. So you'll see throughout the city, there's a lot of that mixture. We're going to talk a little bit about that later when we get to some of the specific places to visit. But these buildings, which are much more recent from the late 19th and early 20th centuries, still have a lot of that Arabian look to them, which you'll see throughout much of Andalusia in southern Spain. Ceramic tiles are also very common. They're called azulejos in Spanish. You see them in Portugal, you see them in Spain, particularly in the south. The ceramic industry was very important throughout many of the centuries of Seville's history. It's almost impossible to take a bad photo in Seville because literally every corner, everywhere you look, you see these just incredible buildings, many of which have bright colors and ceramic tiles. You'll find them from the medieval period right up until the 20th century as well. In a number of places, you can even peek. Here's an example on the left where you can peek into the inner courtyards of the old mansions in the city. Many of those mansions are now open to the public. I'm going to take you to a couple of those. There's lots of them to visit. I'm going to take you just to a couple of the better known ones, but they're a good way for you to see how the wealthy merchants used to live in the city in the old days. This building here, which was only a couple of blocks from my hotel near the river, this was originally the main train station for Seville, very close to the river, and it's been turned into a, to be honest, not very exciting shopping mall. The interior is pretty bland, but the exterior is a beautiful example of the old public kind of buildings that served an important purpose in the city. So I'm whizzing through these just to give you an overview of what the personality of the city is like. This is actually City Hall. It's the end of City Hall. It's a big, long building that fronts on a beautiful park. And it shows you, if you look at the tree on the right, you can see that the French aren't the only ones who torture their trees. The City Hall has several of these completely rectangular trees looking onto a beautiful park on the left-hand side. And I'll also point out the tram tracks that you can see down below. There's a good amount of public transportation in Seville. I'm not sure how much you will use the metro or the trams or buses because so much of what you can see is within easy walking distance in the city, but the trams are very good, the buses as well. So if you aren't really up to lengthy walks throughout the day, it's a good way to get around and relatively inexpensive. Here's the first church I'm going to show you, which is probably the second most important in the city. I'm going to show you a lot of churches. Don't worry about mixing them all up. This is called the Church of the Divine Savior, and it's the second largest church in the city. And like many of the ones that I'm going to show you, it was at one point in its history a mosque. And then at some point when during the Reconquest in the 13th century, previous sites where there were mosques were reconverted into and rebuilt into Christian churches. So this particular one was built in the 18th century in a very lavish Baroque style. And you'll find as you explore the churches of Seville that there is one incredible Baroque altarpiece after another. To be honest, after a while, they kind of start to all look alike. They're incredibly over decorated, gilt, with incredible statues, but they are quite beautiful. And even small churches are likely to have them. An image that you'll see in many of the churches are these two patron saints. This is Justa and Rufina. They were sisters who in the third century AD, they were potters who lived across the river in a neighborhood called Triana, which I'm going to show you in just a bit. And they refused to sell their wares to pagans. So they ended up being martyred, and now they are considered the patron saints of the city. And they are often depicted, kind of ironically, with this tower in between them, which is called the Giralda, which is the symbol of the city. It's a former minaret, but now serves as the bell tower of the city's cathedral. So you'll see that in real life in just a bit. Strolling the river is a very pleasant pastime. Here's one thing that you can visit called the Torre del Oro, the Tower of Gold. It's a 13th century watchtower, which has been turned into a museum of naval history. If you're interested in naval history, it's worth a visit. But it's even better for if you climb all the way up to the tops, you get really nice views up and down the river. This is another place that's not in the top 10, but I think worth visiting as well, called the Archivo de Indias. It's mostly interesting for the building, unless they happen to have, it is a center for archives. So it has important documents from the history of Spanish exploration and the history of Spanish mercantilism. And they do have some of those on display. When I was there, they didn't have too many, so mostly what I saw was the building. And it is worth it for that. It's also free, so you can just scoot in and take a look around. This is the central courtyard and the grand stairway, which leads you upstairs, where they have impressive halls lined with archives of the Spanish Empire throughout the centuries and its business around the world. So it's worth sticking your head in if you have the time. On the north edge of the city, if you imagine that the city was once surrounded by protective walls, this is the very northern edge of the sort of circular historic city. This is called the Basilica de la Macarena, which is right next to the Lion Gate, which you can see here on the left. And that's a gate from the 12th century, back when the city still had its walls. Most of those walls have disappeared at that point, but this is one part of the city where you can still see them. The church has this striking mustard color, which is kind of fun. And the interior is very dramatic, as you might expect. But one thing that you would not expect from this church is that it's not old. It was actually built in 1949, right after World War II. So although this looks like a church that was built in the 17th or 18th century, it's not. It's not even 100 years old yet. But this neighborhood is nice because you can actually see a fairly good stretch of what the original protective fortification walls looked like. Just a few more street scenes. The left is the entrance to the Archbishop's Palace right next to the cathedral. And this is the Baroque Palacio de San Telmo, which used to be a royal palace back in the 16th, 17th, 18th century. I'm forgetting now. But now it is a government building. So you can't really visit the interior, but the outside is quite spectacular. It fills an entire city block. And a great thing about Seville is the food. That's great about Spain in general. On the left, I stopped to eat outside, which was perfect for the time of year because it was pleasant enough to eat outdoors, but not too hot and also not too cold. So I had a nice glass of wine and some vegetarian paella and a limoncello mousse with some coffee for dessert. Of the scores of churches around the city, um, I visited far too many to show you, but this is one that I really enjoyed. It's a convent, the convent of Santa Paula, which dates from 1470. And it's again another interesting mix of both Christian and Islamic designs. This here you can see the nave and also the exterior um, doorway that leads into it. And another church, this is the Church of Santa Catalina, which has a complete Moorish dome built on the side of this. This, you would swear if you were looking at this church that it could be in North Africa or the Middle East. This side chapel with the dome has what's called a mudéjar style ceiling. And mudéjar, you can also, you can see it here, made out of carved and gilded wood. It's a style that was used during the period after the Reconquest. So roughly from the 13th to the 16th centuries, after Spain had become Christian again, or Andalusia at least had become Christian again. So even though this is a Christian time period, they still incorporated many of the design elements that had become popular in the area. And so even Christian buildings at that time were built with this beautiful synthesis of the two styles, both Islamic and Christian together. Again, someone just asked. This is called the Church of Santa Catalina, and it's kind of on the north side of the city. And this is actually inside the church where you can see a tomb. This is a Christian tomb, but looking at it, you would be forgiven for thinking that it's actually something from the Middle East, judging from the tile work and the pointed arch and so forth. And this is the entrance to that same church from the inside with that typical mudéjar carved wood design. Pastries are very popular in Seville and with me, so I had to eat a lot of them. This is one of the oldest and most famous pastry shops in Spain. And even if you don't actually buy anything from them, it's worth sticking your head in just to see the beautiful historic style of the interior and just to window shop all the different things that they have available. Lots of different kinds of pastries and cakes. And even this is the Giralda that I mentioned, the tower, made entirely out of sugar. So if you need a sugar fix, this is a good place to stop. Another popular aspect of Seville is flamenco, which actually developed in Seville mostly over the past, say, 300 years, 250, 300 years or so. And if you're interested in it, there are lots of performances throughout the city that you can go to. And in fact, if you're lucky, you may see some free performances in the street in different plazas throughout the city. You can just stop and enjoy those. But otherwise, it is worth paying to go to a performance where they demonstrate the different types of dances. And there's even a museum of flamenco, which, if you're really into it, you can visit to see some of the costumes that they wore, and also get a little bit of the history of how the dance developed from the poor part of the town across the river into sort of an international phenomenon that it is now. This is probably my favorite church in the whole city. It's called the Iglesia de Santa Maria la Blanca. And as with many churches, like I mentioned earlier, it was built on the site of a former mosque. And also, at one point in the 14th century, there was a synagogue here as well. What you see now is from the 17th century in a high Baroque style. And in fact, I would go beyond Baroque and say this is really verging into Rococo because it's completely over the top. The detailed plasterwork on the ceiling is just staggering, particularly in a church that isn't physically all that big. It really was quite amazing. And it's not all that visited. When I was there, I was the only person in the church at the time. Um, and the mixture of the plaster and the gold, it's just really incredible to see all this detail. That's the dome over the north over the transept. And for some reason, this is St. John the Evangelist. I don't know why he's got a coffee pot on his head. I was unable to find anything that explained what that particular symbolism was. This is another amazing chapel. To be honest, I've completely forgotten where this was, but it's a good example of the kind of places that if you just are walking through a neighborhood and there's a church, stick your head in and see what it looks like. I did go to this famous restaurant. This is called El Riconcillo, and it's one of the most popular tapas restaurants in the city. It can get quite busy at certain times of day. And in fact, it claims to be the place. I don't know if this is true or not, but this is what they say. Supposedly, tapas as a kind of food was invented in this restaurant in the mid 1700s. It opened in 1760 and has really changed remarkably little since that time period. So it's full of atmosphere, wonderful classic decorations, and really good food and wine. Even if you don't really know about tapas or really don't know what you should order, that's fine. They're happy to make suggestions. I got some good Spanish wine. And standing at this table, he just kept bringing me different examples of tapas that he thought went well together. So it was a really good experience, even though I was there by myself. Another thing I found, if you're trying to economize a little, bocadillos, which is essentially the Spanish word for sandwich, you can buy them all over the place from street stalls. And they're a really tasty and delicious way to eat for only a few euros if you want a cheap lunch on the go. You'll find most of them have crusty bread like this with Iberian ham and cheese and vegetables and tuna and all different kinds of things. And it's a very inexpensive way of getting a good lunch. Another major site is the Bull Ring, which also dates from the 1760s and seats about 12,000 spectators. Bullfighting, of course, these days is very controversial, even in Spain, although it is still legal in Spain and a number of other countries. At the time that I was there in November, they don't do them because there seems to be a season for bullfights, which runs roughly from like April through September. And they do still kill the bulls in bullfights here, which of course has caused a lot of controversy outside of Spanish-speaking countries where it's still a tradition, but even in Spain where there is a significant movement to ban them. But at this point, they are still legal and they still occur. But they do have bullfights where the bull is not actually killed at the end. So that seems to be a compromise that has worked in some cases. However, whatever your feelings about bullfighting, visiting the bull ring is well worth it just to understand the history of it and why it is so important in Spanish culture. So it's a fascinating exhibit showing the history of the famous bullfighters, the costumes that they wore, posters advertising the different things throughout the time period. And at the end, you can enter the ring itself and see what it's like to stand in the middle of a bull ring. You can see how large it is. And every spectator's seat has a number, just like in modern sports arenas. And it's right at the edge of the river, which Seville makes very good use of. The Guadalquivir is very wide at this point, and there's a lot of boating activities that you can do. There are dinner cruises and all kinds of different river cruises that you can take. But just strolling up and down the river is enjoyable in and of itself. For several kilometers through the city, you can walk or cycle all the way along this promenade that goes through the entire central part of the city. And here you can see one of the best known bridges that leads across to a neighborhood called Triana. Um, and like the rest of the city, this is full of atmospheric streets and lots of lovely little buildings. The cute pavilion that you can see on the left at one end of the bridge is called the Capilla del Carmen. It's actually a little church. Um, one of the famous things to visit right near that chapel, almost right next to it, is the popular and very traditional market, covered market, which has all different kinds of things for sale, as you'd expect in a European market. So it has meat, it has fish, it has produce, it has local products of all different kinds, bars to drink at. But the design inside is really nice because they have all the ceramic tile, and it's a good place to grab something quick to eat if you're strolling around the city. Um, if you like Iberian ham, Seville is a good place to go. And of course, plenty of sweets too, if you like those. I happened to be there. I was there right at the end of October and the first week of November. So I was wandering around on All Saints' Day, the very first day of November. So people were a little bit more stylish than usual. I had all dressed up, and it was kind of fun to see people um, dressed to the nines as they strolled around and went to church services and so forth. The Triana neighborhood has been known for centuries as a center of ceramics. I mentioned that the two patron saints, those sisters that are now considered the patron saints, this is the neighborhood that they were originally from, and that was over 1,500 years ago. So you'll see lots of ceramic shops and ceramics on the buildings themselves. It also is considered to be the neighborhood that's the birthplace of the flamenco dance. So not specifically, not just in Seville and Andalusia, but supposedly it started in this neighborhood, which was considered to be poorer than the central city across the river. And it was a dance that developed among those lower classes and eventually became much more popular. Here's another elegant courtyard with ceramic tiles and lots of houses and churches that were decked out for the festival. And not just the residents, but some of their pets were out watching to see what was going on. This is looking north up the river. Actually, if you remember the tower, the old military tower that you can go up. This is looking from the top of that up the river. You can see the Triana neighborhood on the left. And in the distance is Seville's only skyscraper, which is called Torre Sevilla. It's not that old. It was finished about 10 years ago. And there was a lot of controversy because Seville doesn't have any skyscrapers. So it was designed by a well-known architect, Cesar Pelli, who you might know him from some things that he's built in the United States. Probably his most famous work is the Petronas Towers in Kuala Lumpur, which for a period of time were the tallest buildings in the world. It's actually, as skyscrapers go, a perfectly attractive building, but the locals call it the lipstick because it does kind of look like that. And they don't really love it because they feel it destroys the skyline by creating a skyline. There really is nothing else in Seville except for historic churches and the cathedral that really peak up above most of the buildings. So it's changed things, although at least it's kind of on the outskirts. So it's not really in the central part of the city. This is moving a little bit further south along the river. There's a series of huge parks, which we'll look at in a bit, and some monumental buildings. This is on the left, a monument to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, with a representation of Columbus's ships, which obviously have lived on in memory. And the luxurious hotel Alfonso XIII. This was commissioned by a former king after World War I. beginning of the 20th century, and it opened in 1928 and is the place to stay if you can afford it. Even if you can't afford it, you should definitely stop by to at least take a look, because you can wander around the insides, you can have a drink in the restaurant. Rooms start, well, when I was there, which is kind of on the shoulder season, rooms were running around 400 euros a night for the cheapest rooms. So it's definitely not for everyone, but you can still explore the lobby and some of the public spaces. Check out the elevators, the carved elevator doors. It's quite something. Just across the street is the nearby Teatro Lope de Vega, which is a theater and also an exhibition space. They were having kind of a craft fair when I was there, so it's another place that's worth sticking your head inside just to see the incredible detail of the lobby inside. And all along this part of the city, we're on the southern edge of the historic medieval center. The little building on the left is called the Costurero de la Reina, which was built in 1893 on the edge of the park. It's now used as a tourist office where you can stop in and get information. But the enormous park that it fronts on has beautiful alleys and is completely surrounded by some of the best buildings in the city. This is the Science Museum, which is housed in the old Peruvian pavilion, which was built in a very distinct style that looks something like it came out of the Andes. This is the Pavilion of Guatemala, and on the right, the Pavilion of Argentina, which is now a dance academy. So you might wonder why all these pavilions, and that's because in 1929, Seville held an exposition called the Ibero-American Exposition, which included the United States, Spain, excuse me, Spain and Portugal, and then most of the Spanish-speaking countries in South America and Central America that had some kind of Spanish heritage. So it was a way to highlight all of their culture and bring all of those countries together. Most of the pavilions that were built, like the one that you can see here, by the different countries, were actually intended to be permanent. And so that's nice because the current city, these buildings either function as museums or exhibition spaces. Many of them have been turned into embassies for the countries that originally built them. So you can still wander around this whole area and see these fantastic confections tucked around different corners around the park. They surround what's called Maria Luisa Park, which is a very, almost a French style garden with long boulevards that you can stroll along with the palm trees. And they all lead towards the highlight of this entire part of the city, which is the magnificent Plaza de España. So of all the different countries that had their pavilions, Spain, of course, had to have the biggest because they were the hosts. And this is it. It's an enormous semicircle with bridges, canals, towers, this beautiful warm stone, the colorful azulejo tiles all over the place. Unfortunately, while I was there, I don't know why, but there were the canals were empty of water. But it didn't matter because it's still such an incredible place to go. It's like a stage set, especially at night, and I have a few photos of that as well. You can see some of the elaborate ceramic work. So why the canals were empty, I don't know. I have friends who were there only a few months earlier, and they were full as you would expect them to be. So I'm not sure if it's just because of the severe drought that Spain had this year, or it may just be because of the time of year. They may empty them to clean them on the particular week that I was there. I don't know. But even so, it was still an incredible place to visit. You can stroll along the arcaded, the shaded areas. And it's also fun along the bottom to look at all these different nooks. There's, I think, somewhere around 50 of them. that celebrate the different cities and regions of Spain with specific tile work that demonstrates something about that area. This is the one for Barcelona. And then completely surrounding this area is this gorgeous formal park that's perfect for walking and picnicking, particularly if it's hot out. You can enjoy the shade. There's some other major museums in this area. This is the Museum of Popular Arts and Customs, sort of a folk art collection in this gorgeous Moorish style building. And right across the way, facing it, unfortunately closed for restoration this fall, is the Archaeological Museum, which I was sorry to miss, but they're doing work on it and hope to reopen it when that work is done. But I have to take you to the premier site of the city, not just now, but for centuries since it was built, is the unbelievable cathedral, which you can see here. This is again, from that tower by the river. You get a good view over the city. It is the largest Gothic cathedral in the world. And it is one of the largest churches, period, anywhere on earth. It started as a mosque in the 12th century, but after 1248, when Fernando III reconquered the city for the Christians, it was reconverted into a Christian cathedral. And they tore down most of the original mosque, but they left this enormous minaret, which you can see on the right, which they kept, altered slightly, and turned it into the bell tower. And although it's a Christian cathedral, the decoration is extraordinary for its elaborateness, but also, again, it was built during that time period when there was a distinct mix of the Arabic and Islamic influences and the Christian. So all together in one building that's unlike any other Gothic cathedral that you will visit. Most of the work that you see today was done in the 1400s and was clearly done to show the city's wealth and power, how important the city was at that time. The interior is about 140 feet high. It's not the tallest in the world, but it's certainly one of the most impressive. And the Gothic tracery in the vaulting is unbelievably delicate and intricate. And the huge organ, which completely dwarfs the congregation. And then in the center, you'll see that, actually, I take it back. This isn't the center. This is one of the side chapels. And here is the intricately carved choir. And probably the most impressive, even more impressive than the organ on the right rather, is on the left, the Baroque altarpiece, which is the largest on earth. It is 60 feet wide and 65 feet high. And it was carved in the 15th and 16th century, so a good bit after the church itself was finished. And it is just, it's hard to describe. It has more than 200 carved figures that are either painted or covered in gold. You can see just incredible, the incredible detail. And elsewhere in the church, there's many other things to see as well, including some very impressive stained glass, where you might recognize this pair again. These are the two sisters, Justa and Rufina, with the minaret bell tower in the center, known as the Giralda. And on the left, it's kind of hard to miss. This is the tomb I believe it's the south wing of the transept. This is the tomb of Christopher Columbus. If you are good with heights, you can climb the Giralda, which is 350 feet high. It's actually an easy climb because unlike many towers which would have had endless stairs, the Giralda actually has ramps. So it's an easier ascent. And the reason it had ramps is because originally it was designed that way so that men on horseback could actually ascend the tower. And it's wide enough and tall enough for horses to pass each other and not have to climb stairs. And of course, if you do it, you get a fantastic view, stunning view out over the entire city, plus a really great view. You can see the Lipstick Tower off in the distance, and also a really good view of the structure of the cathedral itself, which is kind of hard to get from the ground. So up here you can see the nave, the transept, and some of the other buildings around it. It does have a cloister, as many Gothic churches do, and it's filled with orange trees and has a beautiful view back up to the side chapels and the tower. The second place that you will want to visit, if you're only in Seville for a couple of days, most people are going to visit the cathedral, and the second thing is the Alcázar, which is the former royal palace, very close by. It's just a block away or so from the cathedral. This is the main entrance called the Lion Gate. Both the cathedral and the Alcázar, I should mention, if you're visiting there, make a point to buy your tickets online ahead of time. They are very busy. Even when I was there in November, which is nowhere near as touristed as the summer, there were still a lot of competition to get time slots to be able to visit. So make sure either before you go or the very first thing once you get there, try to buy your tickets. You can buy them online, and that means that you can get in, reliably get in at a particular time of day that you can plan around. The main entrance, once you go through that gate, this is the Patio de la Monteria. The whole complex was originally built in the 10th century as an Islamic fortress. But after it was reconquered in 1248, it became a royal palace for the Spanish kings and queens, and was subsequently added onto and rebuilt, particularly in the 14th century, but even considerably later. It's one of the most amazing buildings you will visit anywhere in Spain. It's again in that style I mentioned called the Mudéjar style. So it's that mix of Christian and Islamic iconography with elegant courtyards, sumptuous detailed decoration in stucco and in marble. It's actually several palaces in one now because they were built over different time periods by different rulers. This is this very serene patio here. On the left is the Patio de las Doncellas. And each courtyard has its own distinct style, its own personality. And the ceilings are particularly intricate and impressive. I feel like I came home feeling like here in America, we should be doing much more with our ceilings than we do. Although I don't know that we're really well equipped to do this kind of decoration. And again, I need to keep emphasizing what you are seeing here is not Islamic. This was not built during the time when the Moors were in charge of Andalusia. This was built during the Christian era, but built in this style that had become popular at that time. The decoration is just it's mind-boggling. The incredible detail. Some of this is carved stucco, some of it is marble, much of it is the dome that you can see here is wood but gilt. This is called the Hall of the Ambassadors, probably the most impressive space in the complex, built by King Pedro I in the 14th century. Each room is more amazing than the last. Once you're in with your timed ticket, you can spend pretty much as much time as you want there. I would encourage you to revisit rooms after you, because it's such a labyrinthine building, and it's huge. So it's easy to get lost, and it's worth it to try and go back and revisit some of the things a second time if you can. Even the views from one room to another or one courtyard or another are are impressive because they were designed that way. It was designed to lead you from one space to another with intriguing designs. And of course, the details up close, this is just some examples of the ceramic tile. Because it's ceramic, it's in pretty good condition because that's a very durable material that lasts a very long time. So the colors are pretty much as vibrant as they were when they were first created. It also has extensive gardens that are worth exploring. Formal and informal areas, there are fountains and palms and pavilions. This was all enclosed specifically for the royalty to enjoy in private. But now you can wander it to your heart's content. This gallery runs, it's elevated, so you get a nice view over the gardens, and you can stroll there in the shade. Another much more modern thing to show you something completely different. This is called las setas, the mushrooms, which are the third most visited thing in Seville. So once you've done the Royal Palace and once you've done the Cathedral, most people head here. And depending on your taste for modern architecture, it's still, you can't deny that it's impressive. This covers an entire public square. This neighborhood used to have a big public market, which fell on hard times and was eventually closed down, and the whole area was kind of not doing well and run down. So in the very end of the 20th century, beginning of the 21st, they had a competition, design competition, to revitalize the area, and this is what won. A German architect came up with this idea, and here you can see some images during the construction, and also an aerial view. There are 6 mushrooms on these enormous pedestals. They were completed about 15 years ago, and have proved a major attraction for visitors and locals. You can imagine this might have been controversial initially because it's so very different from the rest of the city, but people really seem to enjoy them now, and it's become a very popular place, not just for tourists, but for locals. At night, there's an incredible light show and music as well. They're billed as the largest wooden structure in the world, which isn't really fair because there's a lot of metal and steel that actually forms the basis of the structure and holds it up. But much of what you are seeing here is indeed wood. This is another place where if you want, you can wander around the neighborhood and see it at all times of day. But if you want to go to the top, which you can do for there's an admission fee, it's another place that you should absolutely buy a ticket online ahead of time rather than just showing up and waiting in line. If you do go up to the top, nighttime is one of the best times to do it because the lights are even more impressive at night than they would be during the daytime. The whole square is surrounded by restaurants and shops. They have music performances. I found this building kind of interesting. It has a lighted sort of sculptural map of the city built into the side of the building. And I really envied these people. I don't know whether this is a hotel or a private home or a restaurant, but what an incredible place to have dinner. Here's a view of it at night. And if you do climb up, sunset is the most popular time, and again, nighttime just because of the lights. There's a 360 view throughout the entire city. And the lights are constantly changing color and intensity. And there's a walkway that you follow all the way around. There's music, and you get an amazing view out over the city. You can see off in the distance the spotlit cathedral. As well as many of the other church spires throughout the city. Completely different again. Let's go back in time. I mentioned earlier that there are a number of private palaces, and I did visit several. But if you only have time for one, I would go to Casa de Pilatos. The name refers to Pontius Pilate because one of the original family, this goes back to the 15th century during the different crusades when various people in Europe, Western Europe, were visiting the Holy Land. And there was a member of this family who went on pilgrimage to the Holy Land and came back and started the house in the late 1400s. And supposedly it has some design resemblance to Pontius Pilate's house, but that's a pretty tenuous connection. But the name stuck. In any case, the building as you see it now has this beautiful Andalusian style courtyard surrounded by galleries and statuary and beautiful gardens. This is again in that Mujedar style. Oh, I can't say that word this afternoon. So it's very similar to the Alcázar, with innumerable different designs of ceramic tiles and stucco. This was obviously an extremely wealthy family. And you can visit the upstairs room. Although it is a museum now, many of these palaces that are open to the public are still actually privately owned by private families who live in some parts of the palaces. So you can see the private rooms upstairs. I loved what I felt had to be the mother of all coat racks. But you'll see many of the upstairs rooms that have been altered at different times over the centuries, well into the 20th century, are actually quite comfortable. This particular place still serves as the residence of the dukes of a particular Spanish family. So they still live there at certain times of year, and it's a relatively comfortable place if you're that wealthy. And again, just the detail is magnificent. Another worthwhile palace, if you have a chance to visit one with slightly different style to it, is the Palacio de las Dueñas, which is also private but open for visits. It's the home of the Duke of Alba. I don't know if you knew that there still is a Duke of Alba, and he lives here, at least at certain times of the year. It was built about the same time as the previous palace and also has some very elaborate gardens and another typical Andalusian courtyard. The grand staircase is typically monumental with an amazing carved ceiling, but you cannot visit the upper floors. They are for the private family. But the rooms on the ground floor are still incredibly impressive, mostly done in Renaissance style. And they even have a lot of family photos around, this being very well-to-do, both financially and politically connected family. There are family photos of the kids and their weddings and dinners with Jackie Kennedy and so forth, sprinkled around the house. I loved Seville at night. It's absolutely delightful at night, particularly if the weather is pleasant, which it was when I was there. There's lots of street life. All the restaurants and bars and cafes are open out onto the sidewalk. There are people strolling. The kids are playing football in the park. And it's a very safe city, I found, to stroll around, particularly like in the center where every street is full of activity. And a lot of stuff is lit up. Most of the major historic monuments are, but also just a lot of commercial buildings like this one that have beautiful architecture. Here's the cathedral. And of course, this is the back of the cathedral with the Giralda Tower. The archives building that we visited earlier. And this is that fancy hotel, the Alfonso XIII luxury hotel, which is also very impressive at night. I wandered into this building, which isn't always open. If you have a chance, it's worthwhile to stick your head in here. This is currently part of the University of Seville, and it fills an entire city block. It's enormous. The reason for its incredibly elaborate facade is that it was built originally in the 18th century as a tobacco factory, the Royal Tobacco Factory, in fact, which is why it's so fancy. Um, at the time that it was built, it was the largest industrial building in the entire world. And it remained a tobacco factory well into the 20th century. It stopped doing that about the 1950s, and it has since been converted into university space. But you can explore at least part of it. You can visit the main courtyard, where there's some interesting exhibits about its history. At one point, back when it was the tobacco factory, there were about 3,000 mostly poor women and girls working here, making cigarettes. And if you are an opera fan, you may know Bizet's opera Carmen. And in the fictional story of Carmen, she was a cigarette girl working in this very factory. The opera was based on this building. And it's a tragic love story between her and a soldier, and I won't go into all that. But if you're familiar with the opera, the building is really fascinating because you can imagine what it might have been like to work in pretty awful conditions, but in such an amazing building at the same time. Here's the elaborate stairway, and they do have some fun exhibits. This is an old cigarette making machine. So they have some places where you can learn about what was done in the building. I walked through some of the park areas at night too. This is the Portuguese embassy, which was one of those pavilions from that exposition 100 years ago. And even if you don't spend too much time there at night, you have to visit the Plaza de España, which is just incredible at night. It's all lit up. The fountain changes colors. All the buildings are spotlit. And there's actually fewer people, which is kind of nice. And you'll hear the clip-clop of the horse-drawn carriages as they wander around. I also saw, this is just a weird photo, those weird lights that you can see in the sky, which are not alien spaceships. I assume they were some sort of drone light show, but I heard nothing about it, and I was kind of surprised that nobody else on the street seemed to be paying any attention to them. I was the only one looking up, so I don't actually have an explanation for what they were. Maybe they were really alien spaceships. This is another of the palaces that I visited that was a little different from the others, and I liked it for that. This is the Palacio de la Condesa de Lebrija. For those of you who've spent any time in Boston, you're, I'm sure, familiar with the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. And this was kind of a Spanish equivalent. This was a wealthy art collector, woman who had amassed an enormous collection of art from different time periods, but mostly ancient art, ancient Rome, ancient Greece, along with a lot of other kinds of things. And she built an elaborate palace to put it all in. So this is actually, the building predates her life, but she did a lot of renovations to it. It's a 15th century palace, so a little bit later than the other ones that we went to. She acquired it in 1901 and significantly modified the interior to accommodate her collection of tile work and artworks from all different kinds of eras, especially ancient Roman mosaic floors. So here's an example. She had many different things. She collected decorative arts from different time periods in Spanish history, ceramics in particular, unusual wooden ceilings. So she redid this entire house to house her collection. This is the staircase, probably the most dramatic space in the house. And it leads to the upper floor, which is a little bit more intimate. The private rooms where she actually spent most of her time. You're not allowed to take photographs up there, but they're much more Victorian in style than the big public rooms on the ground floor. So I love this place because, again, it was a mix of the Mujer style and the Renaissance style and the Baroque and even the Victorian, all kind of a very personalized collection. If you're into art and have the time, particularly paintings, the Fine Arts Museum is probably the second most important art museum in Spain after the Prado in Madrid. And it's free, so you can stop in even for a short time if you want. It's in a former convent, so the building itself is very beautiful to see, and it has some cloisters and grand rooms. And much of the original decoration is still visible, including the grand staircase and the dome. But their painting collection is superb, and it really focuses on Spanish art from the golden age of Spanish painting. On the left is an El Greco. This is a portrait of his son. And on the right is, again, this is St. John the Evangelist again in a slow cooker for some reason. I don't know why, because I don't know anything about St. John the Evangelist that has anything to do with that. But anyway, the museum is probably best known for the 17th century painting that was such a big deal in Spanish history, because it was the golden age with some of the most important artists of Spain. So there are lots of Murillos and Zurbarán. Zurbarán is one of my favorite Baroque artists, and this is a collection of a number of his works. He has some incredibly powerful crucifixion paintings. I also found, as I was going through different places in Seville, that there are a significant number of artworks with truly appalling cherubs and infants. Here are some examples. Some of them are in the museum, some of them are in the churches. Here's a few others. This very strange Christ child who looks like he's a few months old going on 40, and clearly not pleased with someone licking his toes. Anyway, I'm going to finish the program with a couple of day trips, because I do want to take you to some things that are very close to Seville. I deliberately did not spend my time going to all of the places that you see when you're in Andalusia, because it's very easy to bite off more than you can chew, and then you miss stuff. I think if you were to spend only 2 days in Seville, because then you're going to rush to Córdoba and then rush to Granada and do a tour, I think you would feel bad that there was so much more that you wanted to see that you didn't have time for. So my personal feeling is that 5 days in Seville is a comfortable amount of time to see not just the highlights, but a number of the sort of lower down interesting things at a pace that doesn't make you feel rushed. I even had an extra day to just sort of wander around and enjoy the atmosphere with no particular itinerary. And then I spent a day in Córdoba, which was an easy train ride to the east. Takes barely 45 minutes to get there on the train. And then I took a tour to Ronda, which I don't normally like doing tours, but Ronda isn't as easy to get to with public transport. So to do it in a day made sense to do that. And we had plenty of free time on our own. So it was okay. And of course, I definitely want to go back to see a lot of the other areas that are so worthwhile to visit in Andalusia. I'll start with Ronda, the landscape south of the river valley. And actually, if I go back to the map, you can see that the Guadalquivir River follows this valley in between two fairly good-sized mountain ranges. And the area south, as you head into hillier and hillier terrain and finally more mountainous terrain, there's some wonderful hill towns, which, if you have a rental car, are fun to explore on your own, or there are numerous tours that will take you there and give you enough time to explore them. This is one called Zahara de la Sierra. It's known as one of the white towns for obvious reasons. And they're not particularly large, but they're very dramatic, and they have lovely views out over the countryside. They are sort of postcard versions of Spanish villages with the tile roofs and the whitewashed houses. This is another one called Grazalema, not far away. again, with just these could easily be on the cover of any Spanish travel guidebook. And I like this striking display of votive candles in the church. We stopped for lunch here too. This I'm always leery of places that tour buses take you on um, for food, but this was an amazing restaurant. I couldn't believe how good it was. Um, this is pork. I had a goat leg. These are homemade potato chips. And what look like French fries down here is actually fried eggplant sticks that are made covered with sort of balsamic honey made from local sugar cane and vinegar. Really delicious food. You also, if you head down through this area, it's one of the most important places worldwide for production of cork, which is a kind of oak. It's related. The tree itself is related to oak trees, and there are huge cork forests in this part of Spain and also in parts of Portugal as well, that are harvested in a particular way so as not to damage the trees in the long term. You can see here's a tree where they've taken off all the lower bark, and over the next 7 to 9 years, it should repair itself and be able to. They'll be able to reharvest the bark. Cork is not a particularly sustainable crop these days, and a lot of winemakers, which is one of the main places that cork is used, are transitioning to synthetic corks. So that has affected the industry. But it's interesting to see the area where this work is still being done. But the big thing that we visited this day was the town of Ronda, which is the most famous town in the area, and for very good reason. It's an old medieval town, but very dramatically situated on the sides of these cliffs. Has about 35,000 people, and it is divided. You can see on this. This was a big tourist mural that they had in the middle of the town. There's a newer part of the town that you can see over on the left-hand side, and the more medieval historic center is on the right. And they are connected by this astonishing bridge over the chasm several hundred feet deep in between. You can see they even have a bull ring as well, which you can visit. The bridge is definitely the highlight, plus the dramatic situation of the village. The plunging canyon is about 400 feet deep or so. And you can walk across the bridge, which is called the New Bridge. It's the third to be built over the chasm. And it's called the New Bridge because the old bridge is from the 1600s. And there's an even older one that's from the Roman period. But this is by far the most dramatic. It was built over about 40 years in the second half of the 18th century. So it's about 300 feet high with these incredible arches. And the room that you can see here with a little window was used as a prison during the Spanish Civil War when they imprisoned people here and occasionally threw them down into the ravine below. You can also see the old bridge. This is the earlier bridge by a few centuries in the background on the other side of the chasm. And the whole city, even though it's a relatively small town compared to Seville, obviously, it has some wonderful little asides from the bridge. There's some delightful buildings like this Art Nouveau example, and the bull ring if you're into visiting things like that. And the medieval part of town in particular has lots of little narrow streets, chic places to eat and drink with a view, and a very impressive church. The main church in the historic part of the town is called Santa Maria la Mayor, which, again, like many of the churches we've seen, originally was a mosque and was later replaced by an elegant Baroque church that they built on top of it. And in addition to the church itself being quite beautiful inside, it had a really amazing collection down in the crypt of illuminated manuscripts, which I found kind of a surprise to see. But you should definitely spend time wandering around the many promenades and viewpoints You can see I was very lucky with the weather. It was a picture perfect day with temperature in the low 70s and pleasant sun. And if your knees are up to it, you can climb all the way down uh, by following a track that comes way down below the bridge so that you can look up at it, which is also a pretty impressive view. In the center of the new town, there is a beautiful park with alamedas that run under the trees and end with spectacular views just out over the countryside. And there's, I think it's a good couple of kilometers. You can walk all the way along the edge. They have this wonderful promenade. And I was lucky to be there in the late afternoon, which is best for the light that strikes the bridge and the houses on the cliff edge. The second place that I visited, which was an easy day trip, because you can take a train from central Seville. The fast train goes to Cordoba in about 45 minutes. Even the slow train is maybe half an hour and a half rather. So it makes an easy day trip. And Cordoba is much smaller than Seville. It's only about half the size. So although it's worth it to spend a couple of days there, I think in a pinch like I did, you can certainly see most of the major sites in the city in one day. If you have to, I would certainly love to go back and spend a couple extra days there to absorb more of the atmosphere. There's a lot of historic neighborhoods to see. This is the old synagogue. It is, in fact, one of the oldest synagogues in Spain, in what was once the city's Jewish quarter. It's from the 14th century. It was used after the expulsion of the Jews in 1492. It was used for a variety of different purposes. Now it's lost its religious use and it is now a secular museum. Part of that is because the entire country of Spain these days has only about 50,000 Jews left. And most of those are concentrated in Madrid and Barcelona, although there are smaller populations elsewhere. Seville does have a small Jewish population, and they have, from what I understand, one active congregation in Seville still these days. But Cordoba has some beautiful buildings all over the city, narrow streets, beautiful monumental buildings. It has an Alcázar, royal palace, although it is not as grand as the one in Seville, and for the time being, it's actually closed for restoration projects. But you can visit the gardens, which I'll show you in just a minute. There is also a small but very interesting museum of the old baths that predate the Reconquest. So these are actually from the 10th century, back when these belonged to the Caliph of Cordoba at the time. And so you can visit some of the underground baths that are built along the lines of a Roman bath, with different rooms with different temperatures of water and elaborate decorations. This is the same river, the Guadalquivir. So it passes through Cordoba far upstream. It's much more green here, though. And this old Roman bridge that connects the two sides of the city is from the Roman period, built in the first century AD. And until the 20th century, it was the only way to cross the river that didn't involve a boat. Now there's a number of other bridges as well. And this one is now a pedestrian bridge. So it gives you a good view back to the old city. You can see some of the old mills that date from Moorish times, and right up until the 20th century, they were used to grind flour. But it's fun to stroll across the bridge to get to the Calahorra Tower that's on the opposite side. This is another 12th century fortification bridge, military bridge, essentially, for protection. And it's pretty impressive. And it has a museum inside that you can visit to get some history of the city. But probably, again, by far the best aspect of it, of a visit to it, is the view from the top, which lets you look all the way across the river. And you can see the cathedral, the Alcázar, and most of the center of historic Córdoba. That's the cathedral, which is by far the highlight of the city. And in fact, it's one of the most impressive buildings I've seen anywhere on Earth. I can't go on enough about it. It's officially known as the Mezquita Cathedral because it is, in fact, still today a mixture of mosque and cathedral. And it has an incredible history. On the left is a model of the original mosque as it was built starting in the 8th century AD over a period of at least 200 or 300 years. And it was enlarged gradually during that time period. Note the skylight here, because that's going to be important in another minute. This is an aerial view of the complex on the right that gives a better idea of how the structure is overall. So the original mosque that you see in the model is this whole big square here. There is a courtyard that dates back to that time period, full of orange trees, and a bell tower, a former minaret that again has been converted into a bell tower. But you can see this huge Christian cathedral that was sort of plunked in the middle, more or less over the skylight in the original mosque. So it makes a very unusual mixture. This is that enormous patio with the minaret presiding over it, full of orange trees. And starting in the 1200s, after the Reconquest, a Christian altar was added right under the skylight of the original mosque. And then completely surrounding it was this original forest of columns, roughly 850, I think, somewhere in that neighborhood. And of course, there's incredible decoration from the time period before it became a Christian cathedral. That's a door handle. Note the double arches that you can see here that give a feeling of greater height in the building. It's probably one of the most magical spaces I've ever been to anywhere on Earth. It certainly rivals Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, St. Peter's in Rome, you name it. It's entirely magical and otherworldly. The red and white scheme that sort of defines the interior decoration was originally carried out in brick. So you can see a mixture of stone and red brick creating this two-tone look. Later on, in additions that happened centuries later, some places used brick, some parts of the building are just painted in the red and white color. But here, this is a good example where you can see the fusion of Gothic and Islamic together as they gradually built the Christian church in the middle of the former mosque. Here you can see some sunlight coming through the stained glass. It is an absolutely spectacular space. And even though it will be very busy, there will be lots of people there along with you. If you wait, you might be able to get some good shots without people in them. And of course, it's worth remembering that in its heyday, it would have been full of people because it was one of the most important religious buildings in Europe. Unfortunately, the mihrab, which is the part in a Islamic mosque that faces Mecca, as this one does, was under scaffolding and because it's being restored, which is a good thing. So hopefully the next time I go, I'll be able to get inside. It's in many mosques, the mihrab is just a small niche, but in this incredibly important building, wealthy building, they built an entire octagonal room off the side of the main body of the mosque. And again, you can see the mix of Gothic and Islamic all intertwined together. The Christian cathedral in the center is absolutely magnificent. This is a private royal chapel that was built in the 1370s, again in that synthetic style. And the transept was added in the 16th century. So this took several hundred years to complete. And it blended the Islamic and the Gothic and the Renaissance, if you look up at the dome here, into one unbelievable whole. This is the choir. In an echo of things that happened today, it was kind of interesting because the construction of the Christian church was opposed in the city because they felt that it didn't fit with the original structure of the building. But it was approved by the Spanish King Charles V. Sure, go ahead and do it anyway. And when he later saw the result, he is supposed to have commented, "You have built what you or anyone else might have built anywhere, but to do so, you have destroyed something that was unique in the world." And he was pretty right. However, looking back in several centuries of hindsight, where we've gotten over the change, it's still it's just unbelievable. I can't go on enough about how impressive this structure is, despite sticking a Christian church in the middle of a historic mosque. It's unique in all the world for the elaborateness of its decoration and the unusual unique history. These are the choir stalls and the immense organ, and looking up into the transept. There's a number, in addition to the main part of the church, there's a number of side chapels. This is the treasury and the chapel of St. Teresa, which have all kinds of interesting things that were added later in the Baroque period. This is the main altar on the left. And then, of course, if you haven't been totally overwhelmed by that building, Córdoba has a number of other interesting things to see. This is the elegant Plaza de la Corredera, a 16th century square that kind of resembles the main square in Madrid, if you've traveled there, the Plaza Mayor. And there's even some Roman ruins. This is a Roman era temple in the middle of the city. And although, as I mentioned, the Alcázar Royal Palace is closed for restoration right now, the gardens are open and they are a must. They follow along the river, and they're very beautiful formal gardens with allées and fountains and topiary, reflecting pools. It's really beautiful. So heading back to Seville for one last night before going home, there's another last view of the cathedral in the afternoon sun. And I treated myself to an expensive meal in a touristy restaurant, just because I can, and I'm a tourist, so why not? It had an unbelievable view of the cathedral as the sun was going down. I had gazpacho. I have to say, as touristy as this restaurant was, the food was superb. The service, not so much, but the view and the food was excellent. I'm a fan of steak tartare, so that's what this is. And it was really quite good. So I had it, ate it at the very last night under the watchful eye of La Giralda, looking out over the plaza. So that's the end of the program there, and I'm going to stop my share and take a look at the questions. Let's see. There are questions in both the chat and the Q&A, so I'm going to try and do both. Let's start with the chat first. Someone mentions that Prague's architecture has been my gold standard till now. I totally agree. Prague is another one of the most beautiful cities you'll ever see, but completely different. I don't like places that try to get you to pick a favorite because they're different. Every place has a different personality, and Prague is beautiful too, but Seville is beautiful in a different way. Any trip planned and led? I do not actually lead trips. I go by myself usually. or with friends or my husband. So the next trip I have planned is Mexico City in January, and then we'll probably go back to Greece for Easter. I'm also thinking of going to the Faroe Islands sometime this summer because that's been on my list for a while. Um, and I plan to do programs of all of that. In Triana, what were the hanging things? Uh, if I'm remembering correctly, they were just, bunting and decorations that were for the festival that they happened to be having that weekend. And that person also mentioned that flamenco was created in Triana by the Roma. Yes, the Triana, I think I mentioned, was kind of the poor side of the tracks on the opposite side of the river. So the lower classes tended to be there, and the Roma previously often known as gypsies. Now we tend to call them by the Roma, which is their own name for themselves, were definitely a major part of the ethnic makeup of that part of the city. And yes, they were instrumental, pardon the pun, in developing flamenco 300 years ago. Who designed the mushrooms? I'd have to look that up. It was not an architect who I was familiar with. I just remember he was German. And I forget the name, but it wasn't a particularly well-known starchitect that you might know about. The name of the art collectors museum. Oh, if you mean the palace that the woman converted for her Roman mosaics and so forth, I will have to go back and check. I can tell. I will let Robert know, and he can add that into the follow-up message that he puts out tomorrow. I think that's it for questions in the chat. So now let's go back to the Q&A. The name of the hotel and how did I find it? Again, I can let Robert know the name of the hotel. I really liked it. There are plenty of places to stay at all price ranges in Seville. I liked mine mainly for the location. It was very close to the bus station, which is where if you take the bus from the airport, and it was barely a 10-minute walk, 15-minute walk from almost anything you'd want to see in the city. So I liked it mainly for it got decent reviews online, and it had it was really got high marks for their fantastic buffet breakfast, and I second that because really it was one of the best buffet breakfasts I've ever had in a hotel. So I could stuff myself every morning and be ready to go tackle a day of sightseeing. The name of the convent, I think the convent that I showed you way at the beginning was Santa Paula. Someone mentioned wide-angle photos. I have to say, I used to take a very fancy, expensive camera with me, and now most of my photos are done with my smartphone. I like that because although there are some things I still prefer a really good quality camera for, the camera phones have improved so much over the past few years that I think over the past 2-3 years, I have found myself using my camera less and less and my phone more and more because it just takes really good photos and it fits in my pocket. It takes good videos, so I do videos now and then. And anyway, to answer your question, it does have some wide angle options that you can use in the advanced settings, which are great for taking architecture shots where things don't always fit in, and you lose a little. There is a little stretching on the side, but for the most part, you can get really good architecture shots that way. Someone also wanted to know about what happens to the bull after it's killed. And, I should know the answer to that because I remember them talking about it in the museum. I don't remember. So I'll put that again on my list of things to look up and tell Robert so he can pass that on to you. Will I do a presentation on building techniques? I don't know if I'm really qualified for that. I did study architecture, but it was a long time ago. But I will tell you this. One thing I am thinking of doing is I spent some time in Chicago, which is one of my favorite cities, particularly for 19th and 20th century architecture. And I'm thinking of doing a presentation on Chicago architecture specifically, not so much the tourism of the city, but focusing on the development of skyscraper architecture in Chicago. So that's something along those lines. And that might be something I'll be doing this spring. Am I fluent in Spanish? Oh my God, no. I should be. I understand Spanish pretty well because I speak fluent French. And so for reading and listening to people, I can get the gist of a lot of stuff. But I found that when I tried to speak, most of the time Greek came out because in my brain, that's my default foreign language, which is kind of embarrassing when people speak to you in Spanish and you return Greek to them. But I did find that Seville, surprisingly, compared to my other experiences in Spain, there was a lot more English in Seville than I expected, particularly in museums and restaurants and touristy places. Absolutely, absolutely right. Spent some time learning a little bit of basic Spanish phrases and so forth. But I did not find that I needed Spanish to be there, which is not my experience when I was in Madrid, actually. Madrid had far less English when I was there. That was a few years ago, so it may have changed. Somebody's talking about Ronda and Hemingway. Yes, actually, I remember reading For Whom the Bell Tolls years ago, and Hemingway's writings about the Civil War in Spain are really good classic literature. And he does talk about Ronda, so that's an excellent recommendation if you're interested in some literary history. Is there a restaurant open to the public in the luxurious hotel? Yes. You don't have to be a guest of the hotel to go in and have tea or coffee or eat in the restaurants, but you will absolutely have to make a reservation because it's very popular. Getting a visa for European countries, that's very much in flux right now. I think as of now, like this month even, or if not very soon, the entry requirements for Americans to Europe have changed. I haven't paid as much attention to that because I have an EU passport, so I don't have to worry about it. But it's not that complicated. It's just a matter of filling out an online form that you can do before you leave, or you can do it at the airport. And I think it costs €7 or something like that. So definitely, if you're planning to travel to Europe anytime in 2026, definitely double check online for whatever the current requirements are, because they're not a big problem. They're just a little different, and it's a little extra bureaucracy. But you can easily do it before you leave or at the airport. It's just something that you would fill out and have on your phone to show people when you arrive. I can, like I said, I will try to share information with Robert. Tonight, I'll send him an email with the information that he can follow up to send you. What is the weather like in the winter? Winter in Spain is much quieter. It does get chilly. It's not cold like it is here in New England, but January, February are not the ideal times to go to Spain. But southern Spain is definitely warmer than northern Spain, and there are festivals. Christmas is big there. But I think if you want to be a little bit warmer, I think I would not go later than November or earlier than March. What were the round things at the base of a long bridge? I don't actually recall. probably decorations. I'd have to look back at whatever photograph you're talking about because I don't honestly remember. Um, Somebody has already looked up and told us that the bull is butchered and sold for food. Another person adds that it's sold for consumption, so that's good to know. Somebody also asked if the places were friendly towards tourists. You may have heard a lot about that, particularly in Barcelona. Barcelona has been really overwhelmed by tourism in recent years, significantly because of cruise ships, which have huge numbers of people coming off of them. Seville has not been quite as badly affected by that because it's not a cruise port, being so far from the ocean. But it is very visited. As I said, it's the third most visited place in Spain. I was there in November, so it was pleasantly full of tourists. There were lots of people, but it wasn't overly crowded, and I definitely didn't feel oppressed by huge crowds of tourists. It was very comfortable, I think. And I felt I had no difficulty whatsoever as a tourist. My last time in Barcelona was many years ago, so it was considerably less touristed the last time I visited, and I think it's changed quite a bit. So if you've read articles or news stories about anti-tourist behavior, like anti-tourist graffiti and people using water pistols to annoy the tourists, I have not heard anything about that happening significantly and Lucia, and if it did, I would bet it probably would not be happening in the shoulder and off seasons, mostly during July and August. So I wouldn't avoid the place because of that. Definitely not. I think I've got all the questions, but if not, Robert usually shares my contact information. So if there's anything we didn't cover, or if you have specific questions, do feel free to email me personally. I like to hear about your experiences if you've been there or if you're thinking of going, and I'm happy to share my own experiences. I will definitely tell him the name of my hotel because I know that was something that a couple of people mentioned. Was the other thing. And I'll double check the visa thing because I think I can tell you in just a couple of quick bullet points what's required for Western European countries now if you're traveling in 2026. So
all right, great.
I think that's it.
I think it is, Jeff. So, folks, let's give Jeff a big virtual round of applause for a great presentation and Q&A. Look for an email from me later tonight with a link to the YouTube recording and information about some other upcoming travel presentations that might be of interest. And yes, Jeff, send me the visa info and the hotel info, and I'll gladly include that along with your email address in that email. So thank you all so much, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day, and please take the feedback survey that should pop up when you exit the Zoom. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for joining me, and see you next time.
Yes, excellent. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.